it has made me wary now of writing about things that are very zeitgeist. I'd say probably the thing that kind of surprised me the most about traditional publishing, or maybe the thing that surprises other people when I tell them about my experience, she just wasn't committing to taking me on, which I think I know now is a little bit of a red flag, actually.
Katie Bishop is the acclaimed author of Girls of Summer, a novel that has garnered widespread praise for its compelling storytelling and inclusive exploration of complex themes. Beyond her work as a novelist, Katie is a renowned journalist whose writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Independent, BBC, VOGUE, Cosmopolitan, Refinery 29, and many more. Her work offers sharp, thought-provoking commentary that resonates with readers worldwide. With talent for both fiction and nonfiction, Katie's writing is bold, insightful, and deeply engaging, cementing her reputation as a powerful voice in contemporary literature and journalism. In the chat that I'll be sharing with you today, Katie highlights some red flags with regards to deciding on a lit agent. She peels back the curtain of how long it actually takes to get a book published, and something that surprised me were her thoughts, or at least her golden nugget of wisdom, with regards to writing something that is topical or zeitgeisty. But my favorite part of our interview has to be the moment where she shared some of the personal connections she had to her book, The Girls of Summer, as well as sharing how she turned to her research and journalism background to put this book together as well. So whether you're somebody who's wanting to write your first thing, or you're interested to learn more about the author behind the epic book club sensation, The Girls of Summer, then I hope you'll enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. So let me introduce you to Katie Bishop.
So Katie, can you tell me what were some turning points in your life that led you to the point where you sat down to write your debut novel? I feel like it's probably for most writers, it feels like a really long journey to writing my first novel with quite a lot of turning points. So I always wanted to be a writer. When I was a kid, I was one of those people who was always kind of scribbling away in exercise books and making up stories. I think like a lot of people, I kind of lost that desire as I got older. Or maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, because I didn't exactly lose the desire. I just thought it's such a difficult thing to do. So many people want to do it. I'm probably not good enough to do it. So I kind of put writing aside for a few years. I went to university, I studied English literature, so kind of related to writing, but not quite. And then I started working in academic publishing, which sounds like it's related to writing, but really wasn't, because I was kind of editing these quite kind of dry, heavy academic books that, to be honest, I didn't understand at all and didn't have a clue about. And I really just kind of put writing to the side for a good few years. And then when I was in sort of my mid-20s, I started to really miss that kind of creative joy of writing, and just thought, I'm going to start to do it again, just really for myself and just for fun. And I wrote a whole novel at that point, which took me probably about 5 years to write. And it was a really, really long process. It was a real slog. And I tried to get an agent for it. I sent it out to a bunch of people. A few people asked me if they could read the full manuscript, but nobody picked it up. And that was a really heartbreaking experience at the time, and kind of felt like a huge rejection, and just felt like this dream that I had wasn't going to happen. But really, when I look back at it now, I think that's probably the main turning point that led to me writing my debut novel. Because of course, if I hadn't had all those rejections on that novel, if I hadn't have had the kind of the bit of feedback that I got from the few agents who did read it and, said, I like this thing about it, but this thing's not working. All of those things really shaped what ended up being my debut novel, The Girls of Summer. But at that point, I was really dejected and I couldn't imagine writing another novel. But then COVID hit, which was probably the other big turning point in terms of me writing what eventually became my debut novel, The Girls of Summer, because all of a sudden I had all this time because I wasn't commuting into work. I was still working. I was actually working really 2 jobs at the time. I had a full-time job in publishing, and I was also doing a little bit of freelance journalism and freelance writing on the side. So I was very, very busy. And I think that's, one of the reasons why the first novel I wrote took me 5 years to write. Whereas with The Girls of Summer, because I wasn't commuting, I used to get up really early in the morning, and I'd just work for kind of an hour or two every morning before I, sat down at my desk to do my day job. And that was really, I guess kind of, it's one of those annoying stories that probably without COVID, I wouldn't have ended up writing The Girls of Summer. I was one of those annoying people who actually did something kind of productive with my time during the pandemic, which I know not everyone was fortunate enough to be able to do. People who were kind of homeschooling and, key workers and things like that. But that's really the story of how The Girls of Summer came about.
I know we've got lots of people who are watching this who are maybe in the space of
having an idea that they've always wanted to turn into a novel, or perhaps they've started a novel, but finishing it is quite tricky. So Katie, can you draw a picture of what it was actually like putting the first draft of your book together?
Yeah, well, what I will say about that is I've written quite a few novels now, some of which have been or will be published, and many of which will never see the light of day. And I think that every single experience of writing a novel for me has been really, really different. So it's kind of difficult to say what, for me, the experience of getting to a first draft is like. But with The Girls of Summer, it did really feel like a really kind of special, magical, joyous experience to write it. Obviously, I'd had that previous experience of trying to write a novel that really felt like getting blood out of the stone. You know, I just have to sit down and just force myself to just think, just get to 200 words, just get to 300 words in a session, whatever. And I didn't write that chronologically because I was finding it so difficult. I just sort of wrote what I was kind of drawn to or inspired to write, like whatever would make me just sit down at my desk and actually get some words out. Whereas I approached The Girls of Summer really differently. I wrote it very chronologically. I had a plan, which I hadn't had for the first novel. I'm not a huge planner. It wasn't a super extensive plan, but I had an outline of how I wanted the story to look. And I tried to just follow that through very, very chronologically. Again, I'd be getting up at kind of 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, sitting down, doing normally like an hour or possibly 2 hours, depending on how I was feeling, of work. And then I'd go and sit down at my desk and do my day job. And then in the evening, I'll be doing my other day job. So it's quite an intense period, really. I did stray from writing chronologically just at one point because I sort of knew that there was going to be something very big happening in the novel. The novel's a lot about kind of memory and how a particular experience can kind of come back to haunt you, in some cases decades later. And as I started writing, I hadn't exactly figured out what this kind of big thing was going to be. I had a vague idea, but I hadn't really worked out, I guess, the mechanics of it. And the story flashes back and forwards. So I knew that you were at some point going to see that big life-changing moment. And I did get to a point where I realized, right, I can't write any further without knowing specifically what that big moment is in the past, and also what kind of brings people together and brings it forward into the main character's present day. So I did skip forward at that point, and I wrote a kind of really pivotal scene where some of the main characters kind of sit down and discuss what this big moment was like and kind of the impact it's had on them. And that was really how I figured out what that moment was going to be. And then I could then go back and actually write what that moment looked like in the past, and also all of the things that were going to lead up to it, kind of in both narrative strands.
So I have had my first experience of putting a novel together. And for me, writing the first draft, like I was just so lucky, like it just poured out of me. I loved that experience. But then when it came to editing my first draft, I was so humbled because for the first time I saw how terrible it was. And so for me, editing the first draft was probably the most difficult and self-loathing experience that I've ever been through. So what was editing your first draft like?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to first, like, what was your process of editing? Did you like put it to the side and then kind of come back to it, or how did it work for you?
So I wrote the first draft, and then I was like, all right, let's get into this. Let's see what I wrote. And then I was like, wow, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And the way I was going with it, but like, it just, I was so passionate, and just like the story came out, but there wasn't necessarily a coherent structure. And like the themes weren't really thought out. Like there was one giant theme, but the smaller themes, it was just kind of all over the place. And also spelling was just really, really bad. So I picked out one of these things, and I was like, oh yeah, this is bad. I'm going to need a bit of time to just flesh it out and put it together in a bit more of a formal way before I hand it to an actual editor to really point out all of my blind spots.
Well, firstly, it's really nice to hear that you had such a lovely kind of joyous experience actually writing it. I think there's something about, there's a reason why we all write. And I think it is that kind of really magical feeling when you're just in that like amazing flow state and you're writing, kind of time flies by. And I think if you're feeling like that when you're writing the first draft, it probably shows that you're writing something kind of quite special. Again, every experience is so different. And with my first novel, I didn't really have that kind of joyous experience, which I did have with The Girls of Summer. But again, the editing for both of them was so different too. With the first novel I wrote that didn't get an agent, I think I wrote 11 drafts of that while I was editing. Like it was a real process. And I think that we all have strengths and weaknesses as writers. I know I kind of speak to some people who will say, well, I'm not very good at this thing, and that kind of means that I don't want to kind of pursue it professionally, which is absolutely not true, because there's things that I'm good at, and something I'm really, really terrible at is something that really you have to work on in the edit, which is just being able to kind of zoom out and see the bigger picture in terms of structure and pacing. I feel like my writing is kind of strong on a sentence level and kind of building characters and kind of thinking about people's emotional journeys and kind of all of these things. But I always probably have the thing that you have when I go and read back my first draft and I look at it and I just think, gosh, like what was I thinking? Because it just doesn't necessarily, even if kind of an individual chapter, I think like I smashed that was great. When I kind of zoom out, it's like the structure doesn't necessarily normally hang together the way that I want it to. Again, with The Girls of Summer, I did have a much better experience of editing it than with my first novel. I kind of read it through and I was much more happy with it. So it didn't have as many drafts by a very long shot. I think I did maybe kind of 3 drafts of it and it didn't change anywhere near as much as the first novel did. There was a little bit of shuffling things around, a little bit of kind of doing things with different characters. The first draft had so many characters and it was like impossible to keep track of everyone. So a lot of it was actually cutting out an absolute ton of characters. And of course, I think as sort of everyone knows, it's quite hard to get published. For a debut, publishers really want you to have written a relatively short book. So there was a lot of cutting out of things that I absolutely loved and I hated cutting out, but they just had to go for the sake of word count. But yeah, I think the most important thing is being able to take a little bit of time away after your first draft, if you can. Because when you're so in it and you're kind of so passionate about it and you know it so well, it's very, very hard to edit and it's very, very hard to do that bit that I'm not very good at, the kind of zooming out and looking at it from a kind of bird's eye distant perspective. So I did try and do that with The Girls of Summer and it ended up being a relatively fast edit. I'm working on another book now, which is not at all a fast edit. So it does just go to show how different the process is every time for each project and each book.
So you wrote one book only before Girls of Summer? Was it multiple books before Girls of Summer?
Just one book before Girls of Summer, yeah.
Okay, so if you could paint the picture for us, what it looked like maybe for your first book and then for Girls of Summer, once you've completed the first draft to actually getting it published. And maybe you can just also explain like your querying process maybe for your first book and how that didn't really turn out the way you wanted it to. And if you could go back in time, do you wish that book was published? Is it something you want to publish in the future, or is that just a project you're going to leave alone?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'll tell you a little bit about what kind of happened with it and the submission process first. So obviously I finished it and I did all of those 11 drafts and I thought, right, great, it's ready to send out. And of course, I think with everyone, when you complete your first novel, like you put so much time and effort into it and it feels like the biggest, most important piece of work that you've ever done, and you're so desperate for that one to be the one that like gets an agent, gets published. And I think at the time, like even the thought of writing another book is unimaginable because you just think I've put like everything I have into this book, I can't do another one. So I started sending out to agents. I had a big Excel spreadsheet of kind of all the different agents that I thought might be suitable. Everyone, like right from the top to my kind of like dream agents, kind of down to the ones that I was, to be honest, a little bit less bothered about. And I sat down and I sent it to probably about 5 or 6 agents in the first instance, because I was thinking, well, I'll send it to 5 or 6 people. I'm not expecting the first one to immediately snap me up. So maybe I'll get a bit of feedback from them and then I can use that to work on the novel a little bit more and then send it out to the next batch. And I did that a lot of times. I sent it out to probably about 50 agents in total. And I did get some good response, which I think was encouraging. I do sometimes think, I wonder, would I have carried on if it kind of absolutely everybody had just been, no, I'm not interested. But probably kind of 3 or 4 people out of that big list of 50 got back to me and said, oh, I'd love to see the full manuscript. None of them wanted to take it on, but some of them had some positive things to say. Some of them read it and never got back to me, which was a bit depressing, or maybe never read it, I don't know. And one of them said that they were potentially interested in working with me, but it needed a lot of changes. And that was, I remember getting that email and being so excited because I was like, oh my gosh, this could be it. But we went back and forth for a while and I made some changes and we had some Zoom calls and some chats and she just wasn't committing to taking me on, which I think I know now is a little bit of a red flag actually, because when I actually did get an agent, she also had some changes that she wanted, but she had the faith in me to sign me and then we made the changes together. But I did kind of go back and forth with this agent for a bit. I was hoping that might be it. And she eventually kind of just really stopped seeming interested. And I kind of took the hint that that was never going to happen. But in the meantime, I had started writing The Girls of Summer then. And I think that's something that I think is great advice for people that someone gave to me at the time, which is when you're in those kind of querying trenches, when you're finished with a project, the best thing that you can do to distract you from how hard that submission process is just start working on the next thing, because that's the reason why we all do it, right? That's the thing that we love, is the writing. So by that point, I'd started working on the Girls of Summer. Obviously, I've kind of told you a little bit about the writing and editing process for that. That really moves quite quickly with the writing and editing process for that one. And I then, again, got a brand new, fresh Excel spreadsheet up. And I thought, okay, been here before. I know how this works now. I'm sure I'll be kind of filling this spreadsheet up with another kind of 50 people or more trying to get an agent. And I was going to follow the same process again. So I sent it out to, again, my kind of top 5 agents. And this time I just got a very different response. Pretty much all of them got back to me and said that they wanted to read the full manuscript, which already I could see felt very different from the first time, when it maybe took me, to about 20 agents before one person requested the full manuscript. So I immediately thought, okay, well, this is going well. I can feel that this is going better this time. And yeah, pretty quickly I had offers from a few different agents, including my agent who I eventually signed with, which funnily enough, I compared the 2 spreadsheets after, and I hadn't sent her my first novel. And I really have no clue why that was. I'm not sure why I didn't send her my first novel, but I didn't. And I did send her The Girls of Summer, and it turns out she was the perfect fit for it. She loved it. She's great. I've been working with her for kind of 4 years now-ish, I think. And she's brilliant. And I'm very glad that she was in my Excel spreadsheet and that she did make an offer on The Girls of Summer.
What genre would you say Girls of Summer is?
This is a really tricky one, because I think that it doesn't really fit neatly in a genre. And I think that is a bit of a challenging thing when you're trying to get a book deal, because publishers tend to like things that they can quite neatly fit in a book. It makes it a little bit easier to market things. I would say that The Girls of Summer is a kind of book club book, which I think means it's kind of really good for discussing. It's got a lot of kind of topical issues in. I think, if you and your friends read it, you'd afterwards have loads of stuff to talk about, I think. It's also commercial. It's got a bit of a kind of thrillery vibe to it as well, in terms of the fact that it's got a little bit of mystery in there, a little bit of suspense. And so, yeah, if you like kind of thrillers with discussable issues, I'd say it's probably for you. I don't know exactly what genre that makes it, but somewhere between a few different camps, I think.
Yeah, when I first saw the book, so I actually got it from my book club. We have like this giant pink library. I just joined this book club, and they said to me, I could just have a look through, bag and choose books. And like, I saw this cover. I don't know if it's the same cover everywhere, but I was like, ooh, I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I totally did. I was like, this is nice. And then you just like totally gripped me. What if everything you remember was a lie? I was like, are we like rom-com? Are we like, what is this? Never read the back. I always just pick a book based on the front. This was literally the most surprising book I have ever read, but I'll talk more about that later. Just when you got your book published, I'd love to know, was there any expectation gap? What was your hopes with like traditional publishing, and did it live up to your dreams?
It's really hard to imagine what it's like being traditionally published, or at least I think it was for me, because I think being published felt like such a pipe dream. It really felt like, obviously I was trying to get a book deal, so part of me must have thought, well, maybe this could happen. But I think I'd never really thought beyond the stage of getting an agent, because just getting an agent seemed like such a difficult thing to do, that I thought, wow, I'd be, 1 in a million chance of getting this. So it was kind of funny, because I'd never really actually thought about what would happen next and what kind of traditional publishing would actually look like. I'd say probably the thing that kind of surprised me the most about traditional publishing, or maybe the thing that surprises other people when I tell them about my experience, is that it does move very, very slowly. So I got my book deal in 2021. The Girls of Summer came out 2.5 years later, even though when I got the book deal, I had a finished manuscript. There was a little bit of editing to do on it, but kind of not editing that took, I think I was maybe editing it for another 2 months. So then after the book was finished, and exactly as it was when it was going to publish, it still took another over 2 years for it to come out, which I think would surprise people if you told them. I think people probably think, you finish the book and then it, it just kind of goes to printers, and then in a few months it comes out. And I think the book is about the Me Too movement, of course, which was a very topical, kind of hot button topic at the time. And of course, is the topical thing to talk about and think about now, because of course, it's really changed the world. It's changed so many things since it happened. But I think that has made me realize that you can't try and write for really zeitgeisty, topical things, because things move so slowly. There is a chance that by the time your book comes out, people might have moved on from it. And I was quite fortunate that I was writing about something that, when I was writing the book, was very topical and zeitgeisty, and the cultural impact that it's had has been so phenomenal that it is still relevant today. But it has made me wary now of writing about things that are very zeitgeisty. I think that you do have to write about what you're passionate about and what you're really drawn to, rather than trying to write for what you think publishers are going to be interested in.
So when I read a book and I leave thinking like, yo, that was a solid piece of work, like I really, really enjoyed it, it's typically because it's one of three reasons. So number one, I start the book and I'm literally like pulled through and then spat out on the other side. And I'm like, that was quite a ride. That was entertaining, time well spent. Or I feel connected to the book, like it moves me. And after reading the book, I'm often able to put like words to something I felt, or an experience is just explained and I get to see it from a bird's eye view. And then the third is when I read a book and then I just stop reading it and I just find myself wanting to know more about the author. So then I just stop reading it and I Google the author and I go down a giant spiral and then hopefully I finish the book. But now your book
I do that too. I do that too, for sure.
Well, your book was the first book that was all three for me, because I found it incredibly entertaining. Like, it was a super easy read, but at the same time, it moved me, Katie. Like, I haven't been through the exact experiences that the girl went through, but I just connected to so much of the story. And I was just like it just sat in me. Like, it was just this, don't want to use the word like weighted, but it was like surprisingly, like I choked up quite a bit reading it, and I did not expect that. And then I got to the end and I was like, wait, who wrote this? And I just Googled a little bit. I found out that some of this book was actually based on one of your travel experiences that you did. But like you said, it was also pulled a bit from the Me Too movement. So can you just explain how much you draw from your own personal experiences and how much do you rely on your journalism ability to put a book together?
Well, first of all, thank you for saying all that. That is so kind of you, and it's so nice to hear. I'm really glad that it kind of resonated with you in that way. Yeah, as you kind of said, it's about the Me Too movement, and without kind of spoilers, what the main character Rachel goes through is really quite extreme, the kind of big event that I was referring to earlier. But she does also go through a lot of other experiences that are to do with the way that men treat her and treat her friends. She ends up in a relationship with kind of a much older guy. And so many people have kind of said a similar thing to what you said, which is that they haven't been through what Rachel's been through, because again, that is quite extreme and quite an unusual event. But there's so many things in it that are recognizable about the way that young women are treated by men, particularly by older men, also by society as well. And there's like a lot of lines in the book. One that people often kind of say to me is when a man says to Rachel, oh, you're not like other girls. And it's supposed to be a good thing. Which of course is not a good thing, because like girls are great, and when guys try to say you're not like other girls, like what are they really saying about women? And then another one, which again a lot of people have said they've had experience with, is when a kind of older guy to a very young teenage girl will say, you're so kind of mature for your age. Like, I wouldn't normally go for a girl as young as you, but you're kind of so mature. And I think a lot of things like that were taken from my own experiences and from my own real life, and also just some experiences in real life of the people around me, because I'd had those things said to me. And I also knew other people who'd had those things said to me. So I knew it wasn't kind of a unique experience. I knew that it was going to be something that people were going to relate to. But as you said, I am a journalist as well. So I do like to do my research. And that was really, really important to me in writing this book. I really wanted to read about as many stories I could of women's first-hand accounts who'd been through things like Rachel had. So I did a lot of reading those stories, trying to kind of weave them into the text to make sure it felt kind of real and authentic and honest to those experiences, because I also didn't want to be disrespectful in any way to people who had been through that kind of thing, or portray it in a way that was kind of voyeuristic or anything like that. And I also did a lot of research in terms of things that I hadn't been through before. For example, there's a scene where one of the characters has their drink spiked. I've never personally had my drink spiked. But again, I'll be kind of reading a lot of first-hand accounts and information and things like that, because I did want it to feel very, very authentic. So it was really a bit of a mixture, I would say, of my own personal experience and then a lot of research too. And as you said, it was partly inspired by the book's set on a Greek island, and the main character Rachel is backpacking around the Greek islands with her best friend. I did a lot of backpacking in my years. I always went away with my best friend. We've seen so much of the world together. She's brilliant. We still go on a trip once a year, which we're planning at the minute, and I'm very excited about. And I wanted to kind of bring in, we didn't backpack around Greece, so that wasn't the thing that I brought in, but I wanted to bring in that sense of possibility when you're very young and the world feels so open to you and everything kind of feels new and exciting. So that was really the experience from my travels that I brought into it. But I wanted to set it somewhere that I actually hadn't backpacked before. And I would have loved to have gone and researched it and gone and visited a Greek island and kind of done a little research trip. But sadly, because I was writing it during COVID, I actually couldn't go and visit a lot of lovely Greek islands to write them into the story. Fortunately, I had been to Greece a couple of times before when I was younger. So some of it was based on real experience, but a lot of that was also my imagination.
Katie, I see you've got a new book coming out, and it's written here. It's called High Season, correct? We all know how much I love Girls of Summer, but the hook here in High Season is never speak of that summer again. So I have to ask you, what draws you to having summer play such a huge role in your writing?
So yeah, High Season is coming out in August. So it's going to be coming out in summer as well, which hopefully will be a great time to read it. I'm definitely drawn to summer. And I think the reason for that is because there's a lot of themes that cross over between High Season and The Girls of Summer. They're both kind of coming of age novels. They both flash forward and back. So High Season is about a girl called Nina, who is the only witness in the murder of her sister. When she's 5 years old, she's the youngest ever witness in a French murder case at the time. It's set in the south of France. And the book starts 20 years later when a true crime documentary is being made about her sister's death. And she's contacted about that. And she is in a bit of a weird place because she was only 5. I mean, how much stuff do you really remember from when you were 5? She doesn't really remember what happened. And she doesn't know now if she was telling the truth, if she completely made something up, or if she saw something else and misinterpreted it as someone who's 5 years old and doesn't really kind of know much about the world maybe would. So it's another one that draws them kind of coming of age, because when the story is told, Nina is 5, but her sister is 17. And the story in the past revolves around this group of friends who are 17 and their summer leading up to, Tamara, her name is, her death. So it's again about kind of coming of age. It's really about memory. Probably The Girls of Summer also is about memory, but this maybe more so kind of explores memory and psychology and how much of our memory can we really rely on and how much of things that we remember is kind of a false memory. And I think the role of summer in that is because I'm so interested in how we remember things differently to how they actually happened often. And I think particularly when we look back on kind of youthful or teenage summers, we remember these kind of amazing, magical summers where the summer seemed to last forever and everything was so exciting. And we do tend to have these kind of incredible, beautiful memories of summer, I think, more so than any other month. And I think that also really fits in with that kind of teenage coming of age thing. Again, it's an age where everything feels kind of exciting and you know, you have these kind of late nights out on the beach, all of those kind of things. So I think that summer is just always plays a really important role in our personal memories. And that's something that I wanted to draw on. And also, I mean, I live in the UK. It's so grim and grey and rainy here all the time. I just want to write about nice climates and nice beaches and nice holidays. I'm currently writing another book that is set in winter. So that's been a challenge to have to find some new ways to describe temperatures that aren't just really hot and beautiful.
How old is Rachel in the now chapters for Girls of Summer? She in her 30s?
So in the present day chapter, it doesn't actually specify exactly how old she is, but she's kind of mid-30s. I think I was envisaging her being about 34.
Yes, that also felt that. And it's interesting because I didn't feel like this was necessarily for a younger audience. Maybe it's because I'm well into my 30s. I felt like it was totally written for my age group. But then like when you're speaking about it and this youthfulness, it's amazing how you've actually almost catered for 2 age groups.
Yeah, funny enough, I was actually 27 when I wrote it. So I was kind of imagining someone who was 34, whereas I am actually now much closer to 34 than I am to 27. But yeah, kind of as you said, it is interesting because I think when I wrote it, I was imagining the people who read it might have been maybe in their kind of 20s and 30s because that was kind of the age group that I was in. But I've had such a great response from people of so many ages. I've had a lot of kind of teenagers reading it and reaching out and kind of saying, oh my gosh, like I relate to this so much. And I've also had kind of much older women reach out and saying, oh my gosh, this really takes me back to my experiences as a teenager or my experiences in my kind of early mid-30s. So yeah, I've been really pleasantly surprised by the age range, I guess, of people who've read it and enjoyed it.
We love this book. You've got another book coming out. What is it like now, working on first drafts of your next books? Does it feel the same? Is it different with every book?
Yeah, it is really, really different with every book. Writing High Season was really, really challenging. I actually wrote and scrapped 2 entire novels in between writing The Girls of Summer and High Season. My deal was for 2 books, so I was kind of under contract to write another book, and I really struggled with it. I think it's a very different experience once you've got the pressure of having a book deal and knowing that people actually are going to read this book, and knowing that it's going to be a kind of more collaborative effort in terms of working with editors who are amazing, are at the top of their game, and are working with all these kind of incredible authors. So I did really struggle with that pressure. I'm glad that I scrapped those 2 books because I think they weren't the right book, and I think that High Season hopefully is the right book. And after finishing High Season, that's kind of the end of my book deal now. So I will be at some point looking for another book deal, but I had a really just lovely time after finishing High Season where I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm writing for fun again. And I'm writing things that I want to write, not because I kind of feel like I have to write a specific thing or because I'm kind of trying to please anyone. And I was a little bit worried that I'd lost that original kind of joy that drove me to write in the first place. But when I just started writing for fun and for myself again, I just fell in love with it kind of all over again. And I think I'm writing good work now, I hope. And yeah, it is just such a different experience for every novel. And I feel like I'm still learning and hopefully getting better each novel. And yeah, who knows what future novels will be like. You might be talking to me in a year and I'll be like, oh my gosh, just like hating it and struggling again, but we'll see.
Just listening to you saying like how many projects you've actually had to put aside, what does it feel like? Because Elizabeth Gilbert, I remember reading Big Magic, and she was saying that your books are not your babies. However, your books can love you back. And I've just recently abandoned my memoir, and that was just like a really, really sad process. But like, I'm okay with it now. But what was it like for you to abandon 2 novels before you started with High Season?
Yeah, well, at first I'd say congratulations for abandoning a book. I feel like we think of it as a failure, but it's not, because it's such a brave thing to be able to do. And it's so hard when you put so much time and work and effort into it. But I think it's a really huge achievement to be able to recognize that something isn't the right thing for you right now, and to be able to put it aside. You know, maybe you'll come back to it one day, maybe you won't. I am probably maybe a bit too willing to scrap projects. I think because I had that experience of writing a book before The Girls of Summer and it not working out, and then me looking back and thinking I'm glad that it didn't work out, because if it had have done, I suppose there's kind of 2 ways it could have gone. I could have kept on working on it forever and trying to make it better, and it just wasn't the right book, and I would have never got an agent and a book deal. Or maybe I could have worked on it and eventually got an agent and a book deal, but it probably still wasn't the right book, I don't think. I mean, looking at it, I can see why it didn't get an agent and a book deal compared to The Girls of Summer. And I think, you know, when you're writing your first book, you just like try and put everything you know and everything you've ever wanted to write into it. And that, although it's enjoyable to do, I don't think it actually makes for a good book. So I think as I had that experience of doing that kind of early on, and was really glad that I hadn't stuck with that project, I'm now maybe a little bit too willing to kind of get rid of a project. I just think, well, you know, you just have to find the right one, find the thing that you're really passionate about, find the project that's working. I think the thing is, scrapping a project is painful, but you just have to view it as a learning experience. Just because you scrapped it, it doesn't mean that it's not had any value. Probably you've learned a lot. You've learned how to write a novel. You've learned what works. You've learned what doesn't work. You've learned about what kind of thing you want to write about, what kind of writer you want to be. And that's really important. You know, I think that there's a lot of types of art where we think, you know, you have to produce lots of versions of something or lots of pieces of work before you create your kind of, you know, in quotes, masterpiece. Like nobody thought that, you know, Leonardo da Vinci was going to paint the Mona Lisa on his first picture. And I think that we have a really strange view of writing where people think that the first thing they write is that's going to be it for them. And I think that's unrealistic. I think we've got to practice and we've got to learn and we've got to try out lots of things and figure out the kind of writer that we want to be.
That was so well said. I've got so much from listening to you. But I'm curious, if you had to go back in time to give yourself advice before you wrote your first book, or before you got your agent, or before your book was published, what advice would you give yourself?
Yeah, I think probably similarly to what I've just said, because it's obviously easy for me to sit here now and say, treat every novel as a learning experience. But that is not how I felt at the time. And scrapping that very first book was heartbreaking. I find scrapping books really, really easy now, but I didn't that first time. And I think if I had have just known how much I had learned from writing that book, which I couldn't see at the time, of course, because you don't think of it like that when you're just kind of in the heartbreak of having scrapped a project that you really love. But I think if you always look at your projects as learning experiences, and, if you do end up getting a book deal with it and getting it published, amazing. But if you don't, it still had value because you've learned something from it. I think that is just a way of staying sane when you're going through the really tough experience of writing a book.
Now, I'm going to wrap up this interview by asking you to share book recommendations that have made you smile or something that's moved you.
So I have a few. The first one that I recommend everyone is The Paper Palace by Miranda Cowley Heller. It's a really amazing book. It's set in America, and it's about a woman who's kind of choosing between her childhood first love and her husband. But she's carrying a lot of trauma from, very much like The Girls of Summer, an event that happened to her when she was young. And it's about her moving through that experience while at the same time processing that trauma. And the thing that I love about it, firstly, it's very, very moving. There were so many moments in it that just, made my heart ache in the most beautiful way. It's also got just the most incredible setting. And if you've read The Girls of Summer, or if you kind of read High Season in the future, something you'll realise is I love a good setting. Like, I could just read a book-length description of a setting and I would be perfectly happy. And the descriptions of the setting in The Paper Palace are just so beautiful, so evocative. It's a real tearjerker. It will really move you. So that would be my top recommendation. Something I've read a little bit more recently, The Wedding People by Alison Espach, which came out last year, I think, and a friend and fellow author of mine recommended it to me. And it's about a woman. It sounds a bit dark, but hear me out. It's about a woman who goes to a really fancy hotel thinking that she's going to end her own life there because her husband's recently left her. And when she gets there, she realises that the entire hotel has been rented out for a wedding and she's the only person who's not a guest at the wedding. And she ends up kind of being pulled into this wedding. And it sounds like a very dark book, but it was honestly just one of the most lovely, hopeful books I've read in a long time, and just incredibly, incredibly life-affirming. And I quite like a bit of a trashy rom-com sometimes, whether it's a book or a film. And it had a real vibe of a rom-com in terms of, somebody goes to this posh hotel and it's kind of an escape from their life and they get kind of caught up in this wedding and there's lots of kind of funny moments. But it also had so much heart and just beautiful, beautiful writing. So I would really recommend that as well. And then my third recommendation, which I've actually got a copy of over here, is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead, which I've been reading a lot of historical fiction lately, just because I feel like I need a bit of escapism. And for me, historical fiction is the ultimate escapism. And it's a book about a woman who is a female pilot in the early 20th century, ends up being a female pilot in World War II. And it flashes back and forwards between her life and the life of somebody who is playing her in a film in the present day. And again, as you can probably tell from The Girls of Summer and also High Season, I love a book that kind of flashes back and forward in time, looks at different kind of things of like memory and kind of parallels between these different lives. And it's just another book that is really moving. There's so much tragedy in it and there's also so much hope in it, which I think is probably a theme with all of these books that I'm recommending. I really love a book that has like gut punch tragedy, but you also come out of it feeling a little bit lighter and feeling good at the end of it.
I really enjoyed Katie's book recommendations. They are on my TBR list. And if you are looking for a book to add to your list, I highly recommend The Girls of Summer. I've already spoken about this book and raved about it in other videos on my channel. I'm also dead keen to read High Season. So if you get your hands on a copy of either High Season or The Girls of Summer, let me know about it in the comments. I'd love to chat and hear your thoughts. Other than that, I would really like to thank Katie for taking the time out to have a chat with me. Wow, what a great girl. What an epic journey. It inspired me so much with regards to just navigating this journey myself. And if you're in a space where you're writing your first thing, I hope that you got as much value and as much encouragement from the chat as I did. So thanks for hanging out. I'll see you guys in a future video. Take care. Bye.